Graham.
Thank you, Paulo, for that generous introduction. I acknowledge the head of the Roman Catholic Church, the Archdiocese of Suva, His Grace, Archbishop Peter Chong. I also acknowledge the presence this evening of my paramount chief, the Marama Mambale, the Rokutindruketi. I've been asked specifically to talk briefly about Bill 17. Now, for those of you who haven't been following Fiji politics, Bill 17 was an amendment to Fiji's Tokay Land Trust Act of 1940. And for abbreviation, we refer to it as Bill 17. Now, the Native Land Trust Act, or the Tokay Land Trust Act, was passed into law in 1940. I don't think anyone on this panel was probably born then, but that's more than 80 years ago. And this legislation or law relates to native or indigenous land in Fiji. And I recently wrote an article on a brief history of the Native Land Trust Act. At the time, one of Fiji's paramount chiefs, the Turanga Talai, Rotuselala Sakuna, he was instrumental in persuading the indigenous people of Fiji through the Council of Chiefs to give up the control and management of their lands to a statutory body. And he did this by walking the length and breadth of Fiji, consulting every land owning unit, every Matangali and Yavusa. So at the end of this 2 to 3 year process, the Fijian people had a degree of trust and confidence that the Native Land Trust Act and the board would look after their interests. So this was a carefully crafted piece of legislation. And land is very important, as the Marama will share with us later. It goes to cultural and indigenous identity of who they are as a people. Now, what happened when Bill 17 was introduced into the Fiji Parliament several weeks ago? What it tried to do in the bill was to say, well, look, NLTB consent is no longer required in respect of any dealings or transactions in land that have to do with mortgages and assignments, leases, and the like. So I won't, because of time constraints, I won't go into too much technical detail on the bill. But my assessment at the time was that by the amendment that was proposed in Bill 17 of 21, it was actually taking away from some of the provisions of the original law of 1940. What was concerning to me and many other people in this country was that we saw little evidence that the Fijian people themselves were consulted, or that the Board of Trustees who manage and control native land, that they were consulted. But we heard later from the government that the management of the NLTB was apparently consulted. So various people raised petitions, and I believe as many as 20,000 signatures were obtained. And when the bill was being debated in Parliament on Friday, the 30th of July, many on the opposition side, SODELPA as well as the National Federation Party, pleaded with the government and said, look, give us time to be consulted. We need to be consulted as an indigenous people. We are the owners of the land. So from that point of view, it was indeed regrettable that the very people whose rights were being affected were apparently not given the respect to which they were entitled. Now, my view is that in a democracy, it's very important that stakeholders are consulted. It's a sign of respect, and it is very important for the integrity of the lawmaking process to engage the persons who are likely to be affected. It acknowledges the desire that those that are affected, those that are stakeholders, have a say in the laws that are to be enacted, which affects their lives. It is also good governance that people that are stakeholders and are interested parties are consulted. It encourages meaningful participation in the lawmaking process. It builds trust between the governed as well as the governors. And that's a recipe and a strong foundation for stability and security and peace. And it's affirming of the importance of the role of the public. In this case, the role of the indigenous landowners. So the bill, despite the protests of the opposition parties in the parliament, the bill was debated on Friday, the 30th of July. Because the government has a majority in parliament, the bill was passed, and I believe it was sent to Government House the same day. And His Excellency, the President of Fiji, assented to the bill or to the act, and it's now part of the laws of Fiji. So that, Paulo, Your Grace, and Rokete Roketi, is my brief introduction to the failure or the apparent failure of the government to engage in widespread and effective participation on Bill 17. But before I give the floor to the Marama, it's also important to recall that in the Tokay Affairs Act, or the Native Affairs Act of 1944, there's a provision which says that when any bill is to be introduced into Parliament, which appears to the Minister for Fijian Affairs to affect any important matter affecting the rights and interests of the Fijian people, that is to say the Tokay, it must first be referred to the Fijian Affairs Board for their consideration and views. I'm not sure that that process was actually followed or carried out in this case. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is my brief introduction and comments on the lack of consultation on Bill 17 of 21. Thank you.